Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Nepalese Association of Florida Youth Forum's podcast called the Youth Forum Monthly. This is going to be a podcast that is completely run by the members of the Youth Forum, where we discuss topics that we are interested in. We hope that you guys stick around and continue to listen to the podcast as we release episodes. And with that being said, please welcome the hosts for this episode, Sahil Bhandary and Pranav Shrestha.
Hi everyone, my name is Sahil Bhandary. I'm 17 years old. I'm a rising senior and I live in Wellington, Florida.
Hi everyone, I'm Pranav Shrestha. I'm 16 years old and I'm a rising junior from Miramar, Florida.
Today we will be talking about whether or not the decision to not build the Nijgadh Airport was a good decision or a bad decision, but more so our opinions towards that decision that they made in Nepal. So first we'll be discussing a little bit about why they decided to build the airport. So the airport originally was said to be built around 75 kilometers away from Kathmandu, and it's mostly to try to mediate some of that traffic that they had. So post-completion, the airport was supposed to be able to handle 15 million passengers annually and accommodate the Airbus A380 Super Jumbo jet. But by the end of the third phase, the facility will have a parallel runway enabling it to handle 60 million passengers annually, and a 76-kilometer Kathmandu-Tarai Expressway was going to be taking travelers from Nijgadh to Kathmandu and vice versa. And they kind of wanted to make this because of two deadly aviation disasters involving Thai Airways and Pakistan International Airlines in the hills surrounding Kathmandu in 1992. Because of the difficult topography of Kathmandu, which posed a challenge for very experienced pilots to land. And it was on the drawing board for quite a while until it gained renewed urgency after Turkish Airlines aircraft skidded off the runway in Kathmandu in March 2015. And it caused the airport to close down for 4 days, which caused major traffic issues in Kathmandu.
And so Nijgadh Airport was going to be built in like this forest area. And this forest is a national forest. And so basically the Nepali government wanted to relocate like the people who live there. And they also wanted to destroy parts of the forest for the airport to be built. So this brought out like many protesters, and the protesters ended up like getting the airport not to be built. And so now the airport was supposed to be built now, but it's not being built.
Yeah, so the main issue with this for people opposing Nijgadh Airport was, as Pranav mentioned earlier, was the native people and the animals there that are already endangered, and the harm that the airport would do to those populations. But other than that, it would seem to be a false facade for the people thinking that it was corrupt because of the political parties pushing ahead anyways, and this would go against the Nepali constitution. And we actually had word from Kashish Shrestha, who is a Nepali writer and photographer whose work has been published in the New York Times, Monabay, Vogue, and elsewhere. He also advises on policies related to the environment, focusing on renewable energy, food and water security, and sustainable development. He has worked with Nepal's Water and Energy Committee and the Ministry of Health. And we actually got a chance to interview Kashish Shrestha. And so he is for not the Nijgadh Airport, and he is a strong environmentalist in this sense, so he did not want the airport to be built. And we will be going through some of his questions and answers as well as sharing our viewpoints towards this discussion.
So one of the first questions that we asked was, why was the situation significant to you? And why did you oppose the building of this airport? So he said, this is an issue that concerns now just our present, but also our future. And it is something that will be incredibly difficult to undo, if at all. At the same time, it's also a gigantic symbol of corruption by the most powerful public office holders in the country. So to not speak out against it would be to enable it. There's simply too much on the line around the airport project in which very few will benefit, but many will lose from. I oppose the airport project because there was no basis for it to be built other than as a justifiable excuse to cut down the forest and sell its wood as timber worth hundreds of millions of dollars. There's no interest of the community or country in how this project has been revived and pushed forward by defying and ignoring laws, experts, and even the courts. At the same time, not building the airport but making the area a national park offers a lot of positive outcomes for everyone. So my position, quite frankly, has been less about opposing the airport and more about saving the forest from any other such project, because saving that forest offers intergenerational benefits, whereas the airport is something whose need itself is not justified yet.
So in that, you can kind of see that his position, his viewpoint is for not building it, and a little bit about the basis of the park. Located, as I said originally, it would be located 175 kilometers south of Kathmandu, and the proposed construction site lies adjacent to the Parsa National Park, which is a forest for wildlife like tigers and elephants, and home to a lot of rich biodiversity. The entire area is also blanketed in a dense forest of Shorea robust trees, also known as sal. And so those are very, very endangered species that they don't want to harm. And according to environmental and social impact assessment carried out by the Tourism Ministry in February 2017, more than 2.4 million small and large trees would have to be felled to build the international airport in 3 phases. And this extensive work would bring damage to these forests in the Parsa National Park and the Shorea robust trees. And so his viewpoint is kind of saying that building this airport would destroy a bunch of this biodiversity that Nepal has to offer in the first place. Not only that, but they have to relocate these native species in places that they might not be able to thrive or even survive or have the necessities to overcome. And so that kind of has one viewpoint of that. I feel like the other viewpoint you could also talk about is the fact that Nijgadh Airport could also bring a lot of tourism and mediate a lot of that traffic that Kathmandu has with the busy streets, the pollution by the airport, and the fact that they could build, which said to be, it was going to be the largest airport area-wise in the whole of Asia, $3.45 billion. And it was going to be a very, very big project, and it would have brought a lot of tourism. It would have brought more money, but the downside is the environmental impact.
Yeah, so basically, Sal, like, what's your viewpoint on this?
I think that it's very tough to think because on one hand, tourism or money is something that Nepal kind of, it lacks and also struggles with. And I read this statistic actually that Nepal's overall budget for just the whole country's budget for air travel and education combined is about the same, if not a little bit less, than Palm Beach County, which is the county that I live in. Palm Beach County education system's funding and budget. And so the money is a major factor in this as well. And building this airport would bring a lot of money and via the ways of tourism into the country. However, the downside is that the environment would be heavily impacted. Nepal is known for its environment, not just the mountains, but the forests, the safaris, like Chitwan and all these places like this. And without this biodiversity, Nepal lacks in something other than the common goods like money. And so I think that this is really a toss in the air between these two issues, environmental or economic. So what's your opinion, Pranav?
Yeah, so I completely agree, because I do see how some people could argue not to build the airport because the forest is nice and it's home to a lot of, unique creatures and animals and stuff like that. And it's also home to like a lot of people who live there. And so to just relocate them completely to build an airport would be wrong because these people have maybe lived there for generations and stuff. And so on the other hand, Nepal is a very small country. They lack, they don't really lack money, but they are like considered a poor country. And so if they had the option to get more money, then they should definitely go for it. And so the option was there with the airport because tourism could have maybe increased with the airport. Trade maybe could have increased with the airport, because I know Tribhuvan National Airport, which is in International Airport, which is in Kathmandu, is it's a pretty small airport, and so there's limited, flights in and out of Kathmandu, and so it kind of restricts tourism and trade and stuff like that. And so if Nepal's being restricted on these factors like tourism and trade, then they're not going to be able to generate a lot of money. And so for almost like a third world country like Nepal to not be generating money is pretty bad, considering that not most of their population, but a good majority amount of the population is facing poverty. I've seen like firsthand when we go into like remote areas, some of these places don't have schools, they don't have proper roads, they don't have running water, electricity. And so this also creates like a whole nother issue, like sanitation issues and stuff like that. And because of this, I know a lot of people in those remote areas get sick really quick because there's not a lot of hospitals being built because Nepal doesn't have the money for it. So it all is like, it's kind of like a butterfly effect, like what this airport could bring, basically.
Yeah, those points are very good points. The fact that the money is not just for like the tourism aspect of it or like opening up new places, but the fact that you can use that money for healthcare, equal healthcare, because I know a lot of places, like you said, don't have access to that equal healthcare or education inequities all over. So Kashish is a journalist, and so since he was pro-environmental in this debate, we asked the question, what actions did you take when conducting investigative journalism about this? And was there anything specific you discovered? And he responded, I decided to take a much more proactive role because I saw that the government was happily ignoring local protesters and experts, and they were lying the public about the whole thing. So to me, it was about adding a new dimension that would add further pressure on the government to reconsider their corrupt plans. The most obvious thing was for me to get in touch with the company that the government said would be building the airport. Basically, the government said Zurich AG would be building the airport, and so in order for the work to begin, tens of thousands of trees would have to be cut down immediately to build an approach road and so on. Oddly, in Nepal, no media company or journalist questioned this, and they all published what the government said, that Zurich AG will be building the airport. For me, this was silly. And so I did the most basic thing that should have been done. I asked Zurich AG if they were building the Nijgadh Airport. Now, it was not easy to track down the right people to ask, but there was some basic digging around to do. But they are a professional international company, and when I reached out to them, they replied with all the info I needed. And the crux of that info was Zurich AG had never signed an agreement with Nepal government to build the airport, and they had no plans to build an airport in Nepal. So between May to September 2020, Nepal's Minister of Tourism, Yogesh Bhattarai, have been lying to the public and the government about Zurich AG building the airport. And he was lying because the court had already said in December 2019 that if there was no one building the airport, you can't cut any trees. So the only way to cut down trees was to say someone was building the airport. So I actually had already gotten the info in May itself, but I wanted to see how long the minister would keep lying. Then in September, when he said Nepal was signing a contract with Zurich AG at the end of September, I decided to expose it with all a lie. You can read the report, and he said a report on the Nepali Times about the airport. So for this answer, I know it was a long answer, but I'll hand over to Pranav to see what his viewpoint on this was.
So Kashish Shrestha, he as we said before, he's very, very passionate, very, very big on the airport not being built, because he really does see the value of this forest that the airport was gonna be built over. And so automatically, like after you guys heard Sal what he said, it's a pretty long answer. He's very like straightforward, and I'm pretty sure he was really pressuring the minister, pressuring all the other people that were trying to build the airport into basically not build the airport. And as you said here before, he actually got in touch with the building company, Zurich AG, and so they had said that they weren't going to build it, but the minister who was in charge of the airport said they were going to build it. And so he was basically just showing how like the minister was lying.
Yeah, so this whole answer, I would say, this whole discussion and this part of it was more about the corruption that he saw behind the system, more so than I would say, the environmental impact. Even though he went heavily into environmental impact, I believe he's attacking in a subtle way the corruption that is facing, the political corruption, because this Minister of Tourism, Yogesh Bhattarai, he said that he was lying about this whole project just to cut down the trees to create more infrastructure in Nepal, which on one hand, it's good to create more infrastructure so you can build that economy, so you can build the country up. But on the other hand, it's another thing to lie about it and do it in a corrupt way, which is what he's feeling it. And to do it in such a small area where biodiversity is so rare and so rich, but in a small area, is his main problem over this whole thing. And so what he said was he had to dig around because everyone was scared, he thinks, in his opinion, that to go and expose the government in Nepal. And so he did it himself. He went to contact the Zurich AG, who was said to sponsor this, even though he found out that it was a lie, that they were not sponsoring this. And it was a lie all because he wanted to cut down the trees and to build the airport. And there was an important part here at the end of his answer where he said that the only way you could cut down trees was to say someone was building the airport, because that's the only way you could do it. If you're government funded, cut down the trees because of the airport. So I feel like that part was super interesting, and that's one of the main reasons why he felt he could expose this.
So we also asked him another question, and we asked, why do you think it's important to speak out about our opinions, especially in situations like this? For me, and he said, for me, for over 20 years now, it's always been about accountability, that the government and those in power shouldn't feel like they can get away with anything and everything. And this issue in particular was around such a huge ecological matter that to stay silent would have contradicted everything I've worked for and believed in since my teenage years. At the same time, it was also important to add a new voice and pressure to the other groups that were trying to speak out the same issue but were being ignored by the government. That's why when I launched my campaign, I picked a very different approach. I targeted my campaign directly towards Nepal's development partners and donor agencies who fund so much of Nepal's conservation effort, as well as anti-corruption work. I felt that if the government was going to ignore local protests, local experts, local court, local press, what's left? To me, the answer was international community, also because they were getting ready to give Nepal billions of dollars in aid for post-COVID green recovery. And he also mentions how you can read more about what he just said in the Nepali Times article about Nepal must save Nijgadh forest to receive climate funds. So, Sahil, how do you feel about what he said here?
I think his main message here was about self-empowerment and about how we can't just stay silent, because in the end of the day, he thinks because as a journalist, he has an obligation to expose this corruption as well as inform the public, who also deserves to know. And he feels that the public is the local, and the local is the backbone of the country. So if the government ignores the local people, the local Nepalis, then it's negating the actual people that it will impact, and more so with the money that it will impact the hierarchy of the country. And so he is saying that we cannot stay silent on this matter. And because of this, he would organize these campaigns, which I feel like is a great way to get your point across, because if you can't campaign for something, then you have no voice in it. What's the point? And it's because that the locals, this is their country, and he feels that the international community, if it all came together, can stop this corruption. And it's not just about Nepal. He's saying that this is seen as a trend, not just in the past, in the 1800s, but in future too, in certain countries. And he feels that to break this barrier between government and locals, it starts from a small community and it builds up. And he feels as though the international community has a obligation to stand up for what they believe in. So his position of accountability and how the government needs to take accountability for their actions, and they need to hear the locals. They need to understand what the locals want, not just what they want, is something that can be taken into account as opposed to this. And this last part that he said in the answer, where he said, to me, the answer was the international community, also because they were ready to give Nepal billions of dollars in aid for post-COVID green recovery. The international community is wanting to help countries. That's not the part. It's the corruption that he's trying to attack because of the power that the certain government, in particular the Nepali government, has over the people of Nepal.
So I just wanted to say something about what we were going over. So as you can see, like from the answer that I read, he's actually like, I really like this about him, that he's using his platform, he's using his voice to get a point across that smaller groups and people with not that much recognition couldn't get across. So like on social media, he has like 4,000 followers on Instagram, and he had posted something back in May about the same issue about the Nijgadh Airport being built. And so we saw that like 3,000 people had viewed it and over 700 people had liked it. And so definitely that I really like how he used his social media presence to get the message across. And yeah.
Yeah, so we asked one more question to Kashish, and the question was, we already see media everywhere telling us to care about the environment. Why do you think it is especially important for Nepal to be cautious about the environmental impact of the earth? And his response was, Nepal's situation is unique in the sense that we are a victim of climate change, which we had nothing to do with. Because our CO2 emission and role in causing the climate crisis is pretty much negligible. No role, essentially. But the problem now is the kinds of things happening in Nepal when it comes to natural resource abuse, mining of sand and stone, illegal water extraction, forestation, and so on. These things would hugely impact our country's ecology and survivability, even if there was no climate change. So what's happening is Nepal is experiencing the worst impacts of climate change, but it's making those worst impacts even more worse because of its abuse of the ecology. Disasters like floods and landslides, for example, are becoming larger and more dangerous. At the same time, despite elected local governments, a lot of our waste management has simply not changed for decades, which is to say, it's still dumped into rivers or burned. But the nature of our waste has changed drastically from being largely organic to now having a significant amount of plastic and rubber and other inorganic materials in it. So the toxicity of river dumping and burning is now a real crisis. At the same time, the volume of waste produced has also changed. So the amount of waste has become so large that landfill, river dumping, and burning all become desperate ad hoc measures rather than actual waste management. So our waste pollution now, for example, is technically contributing to ocean pollution because we are upstream to rivers that flow into the ocean south. Please keep in mind that despite the Supreme Court ruling against the airport project, leaders of political parties have vowed to push ahead anyway. This is against the spirit of the Constitution. So it really is going to make the point about how corrupt this whole project is. That for an airport that has no developer, no funding, no permit, no committed user, and no real need, politicians are willing to go against the Constitution just to cut down the trees. And if you want to read more about this opinion of Kashish, you can go to nepallivetoday.com and read about Nijgadh and Nepal's livable future. And he wants to keep in mind that he was not involved in the case itself specifically. So Pranav, what are your viewpoints on this part?
So as I was listening to this, it kind of pushed me in the right, like not the right way, but towards his side about the airport. So in the beginning, I was like 50-50 about the airport being built because I saw both the positives and negatives about the airport. And so after like hearing this, the environmental issue that the airport could bring, I really do understand why he's like very passionate about it, why he talked about it so much in his social media posts, because it's saying how river dumping is becoming extremely, like, not popular, but extremely more common in Nepal. And so river dumping usually occurs when there's basically like construction on site near an area, and especially if that's near Nijgadh Forest where the airport was going to be built, that would be pretty bad because it's still like considered a really nice park and a really nice forest. And so I think we really have to like appreciate what he did here.
Yeah, so his main problem with this whole thing is to do with climate change and the fact that Nepal itself isn't contributing to climate change as much as other countries such as the United States or England or all these countries. But the fact that Nepal's natural resource abuse is becoming greater and greater as construction wears on and as things are being built through the government's plans. And the fact that Nepal has such a rich biodiversity and the ecology is something that makes Nepal stand out, makes it a country of very few that have this type of diversity, is something that makes it so special. And it's experiencing, as he said, it's experiencing the worst impacts of climate change, but it's making those worst impacts even more worse because of its abuse of the ecology. So floods and landslides are natural disasters, but at the same time, as Pranav said, there are river dumpings and rubber and toxicity in the rivers, and dumping and burning is now a real crisis. And the building of this airport, and I think Kashish wants to bring up stress the point that the fact that the government, this is not a planned project. It is just a project proposed by the government to kill more trees off, to get the biodiversity out of the way so we can bring money. Because at the end of the day, he's thinking that money is the government's objective, not the priority of the planet. And he thinks that the priority of the planet should come before the money, which I 100% agree on. And so the waste pollution that this airport would bring, as Pranav mentioned, would be detrimental to that ecosystem and the life. And if it starts here, then it continues and continues and grows, and it becomes a phenomenon, like a domino effect in different other countries, which means that it might seem small in the sense that it's Nepal, but it will continue to grow and grow and grow until you would see this as a natural effect. And the fact that it's just becoming it's not government funded, but the fact that the government is doing this without actually an actual backup plan. And importantly, what he said at the end, where it said about how corrupt this whole project is, and for the airport that has no developer, no funding, no permit, or no committed user, how the government wants to make this forest go away, cut down these trees, the biodiversity, all because of a little extra money that they could make, kind of shows the downsides of this airport, heavily in favor of that side than the side of building the airport for just the money aspects of it. So he's saying the government has one viewpoint and is not acknowledging the other side of it. And the fact that he and other journalists and other environmentalists are looking at all aspects, not just environmental, but looking at the exploitation of the natural resources, the ecology, and the fact that this could become a domino effect.
So after reading this, or after like going through all these questions and learning more about what Kashish Dai has done, I think he's really like changed my point of view on this stance. So like beforehand, I think I was more in favor of the airport being built. Now, after like seeing the different types of environmental issues it brings, and also how it can affect the habitat of like animals living there and people who have been living there for like generations, and to think that like one airport would ruin that all for money, really changed my mind on this, because I really now think that the airport should not have been built. And I mean, it's not built, but now that the airport's not been built, I think it's really good, because now these people who've been living there can stay there. The animals that have been there can stay there. And also the environment in Nepal, like the forest area and the rivers, they won't be like harmed now. And yeah. So Sahil, what do you think about, what's your stance now on this?
So before this podcast, I was honestly 50-50, maybe leaning more towards the Nijgadh Airport, solely because I didn't know about the background information about the possible corruption, because I thought this project was internationally, I read about the Zurich project, and I thought this was a legitimate project that Nepal was going to bring in tourism, going to lift the economy, and that the locals were happy about this increase in money, infrastructure, tourism. But after doing more research, after speaking with you and hearing about Kashish Shrestha's responses and answers, questions and answers, I'm really, I think, more towards not building the airport because of the fact that not just the environment, as you touched on, but because of how corrupt this whole project seems to be, and the fact that I was blinded to the fact that this airport was an actual project funded by an actual company, a big international company like Zurich AG. But the fact that I was blinded by it shows that anyone can be blinded by it, even with the resources you have. The government does a good job hiding it, and it takes journalists like Kashish Shrestha to reveal that truth and expose the government for what really is happening. Because without them, we would be blinded. You and I would both be sitting here thinking, "Oh, we should build a Nijgadh airport," but instead, we're here after the efforts of journalists such as Kashish Shrestha that the airport should not be built anymore because of the environmental aspects, the political aspects, the corruption. And so overall, I believe I'm for the no airport for Nijgadh, unless they find a way to make it not corrupt, make a plan behind it, have the locals have their say within it, and find a way that doesn't disrupt biodiversity in a sense, because Nepal is full of biodiversity, and so finding a place to have a major airport, keep in mind, as I said earlier, it's going to be the biggest airport. It was going to be the biggest airport in area-wise in the whole entire Asia, and you have airports such as Beijing's new airport, you have Istanbul's new airport, which is the largest airport in the world, Shanghai's airport, Tokyo airport, Seoul's, which are incredibly large, and which is, I would say, some might even be like bigger than most of Kathmandu Valley. It's massive, and the fact that they would have that in Nepal, in a small place like Nepal, would cover such a large area and disrupt so much biodiversity. If they had other solutions, like maybe putting multiple airports, not that big, but multiple airports in a nearby location, so that it helps mediate the traffic in a better way surrounding Kathmandu Valley, or locating it somewhere else, or maybe even just expanding the airport for however it is, there's a better ways to look at this. And I feel like Kashish Shrestha did a really great job in exposing this truth of the government and the environment.
Yeah, and so I think that's all the time we have. So we just want to say thank you for listening to the end, if you got to the end. And also, we have a scholarship fund going on. And if you would like to donate, please check out our Instagram because there's a link there. And also follow us on Instagram at NAF Youth Forum, I'm pretty sure. And follow the NAF Facebook page as well. And stay tuned for next month for our next podcast.
And so at the very end, we will do first you can find the scholarship. If you don't have Instagram, you can find the scholarship at www.paypal.com/fundraiser/charity/2159688. And we also have a trivia at the end. So if you stay tuned to the end, we have a trivia, and we will be revealing the answer on our next podcast next month. So stay tuned for the answer and our next topic. But the trivia for this podcast is Nepal is host to many world records in the geological field. Included in this is the tallest grassland in the world. What is the name of this grassland? And the next answer will be out in our next podcast. So stay tuned for our next month podcast. And we hope to see you there. So thank you.
Thank you, guys. And I just wanted to add one last thing so you guys can check out the Instagram. It's all lowercase, no spaces, NAF Youth Forum. That's NAF Youth Forum. And if you click on it, follow us for sure. And also, we have a PayPal link for the scholarship that we had that I mentioned before. So if you want to donate, just click the link. And yeah. And thank you once again. This is Pranav Shrestha with.
This is Sahil Bhandary.
And thank you for listening.